Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to each of you. Assistant Secretary Leaf, I want to begin by asking you questions about the administration's plan to route Egyptian gas to Lebanon through Jordan and Syria, and in the process using the energy infrastructure of the Iranian-controlled Assad regime. In January, the United States ambassador to Lebanon said that Lebanon didn't need to worry about American sanctions for this scheme, and that indeed the U.S. had conveyed assurances to that effect. I publicly stated at the time that that was exceptionally poor advice, that Lebanon should absolutely worry about violating U.S. sanctions, and so should every other country involved in these schemes. I added that Congress would strongly oppose the Biden administration trying to enrich Assad, and indeed we've seen and heard some of that opposition already today. Congress, to say nothing of this committee, will ensure that United States sanctions are fully enforced. The actions of this administration are endangering the American allies involved in these deals and exposing them to acute future sanctions risks. It's also worrying that the Biden administration, again, has been deliberately vague about this Middle East policy. Administration officials sometimes say they'll provide letters, licenses, or waivers to exempt countries from sanctions on Assad. Other times, they've said, oddly enough, that the sanctions passed by Congress don't apply at all. So I'd like to ask you about that. Last October, Undersecretary Nuland said that one scheme, quote, falls under the humanitarian category. No sanctions waiver would be required in this instance. Even earlier, the State Department's energy envoy had said that gas deals don't count as transactions at all. I'd like you to be specific. Is it your understanding that the energy project to bring Egyptian gas to Lebanon via Jordan and Syria would be exempt from Caesar Act sanctions, or would it require waivers and licenses to avoid sanctions exposure?
Thank you, Senator, for those questions. We have not seen the final details of these contracts, so I reserve judgment. We've made no decision. We have made no commitments of exemptions, waivers, or what have you. We'll look at the details of these contracts. Treasury, OFAC, State will look at these details and make a finding then. What we have seen, what we've been privy to in terms of the arrangements that are under discussion would involve the World Bank providing a 2-year loan that would also be conditioned on far-reaching, extensive reform of the electricity sector, to put it on a sound of enduring footing. Once the World Bank looks at this, we would look at the details of the contract and make a judgment at that time.
So are the public reports accurate that you've given assurances that sanctions wouldn't apply?
No, they're not accurate. What I am aware of, we have given what are termed pre-assurances that governments may engage in discussions about these arrangements. But the final decision will be the final decision by the Department of Treasury.
Well, I will note that the final decision by Treasury will not, in fact, be the final decision. There will be successor administrations. And in successor administrations, I think it is quite likely that a future administration will immediately move to restore pressure on Iran and its proxies, and is very likely to revoke any waivers or licenses granted. And as a result, the conduct of the Biden administration is exposing our allies to a serious and acute risk of sanctions.
Senator, these set of arrangements, of prospective arrangements, came about precisely because of the current concern on the part of the governments of Jordan and Egypt, and indeed a number of others, about the prospect for the state of Lebanon to collapse, given the diminishing level of energy available, the resort to propaganda stunts by Hezbollah to bring in sanctioned Iranian oil that didn't go to the public, didn't go to the national electricity grid, just disappeared into the black market. So this is a way of transparently, the theory of the arrangement is that it will transparently provide that life-sustaining, economy-sustaining energy to the public, because otherwise the state and the society itself is on the point of collapse with all of the
that may
repercussions.
be the theory of the arrangement, but it doesn't give the administration the ability to disregard binding and mandatory sanctions passed by Congress. A final question, you mentioned Hezbollah, and the United States has spent billions of dollars over the last 2 decades to build up the Lebanese armed forces. Are you aware of the Lebanese armed forces stopping Hezbollah weapons convoys into Lebanon, and how many times?
I'd have to look at that in detail and come back to you with an answer, sir.
Is it concerning that we're giving billions to an armed forces that is not in any meaningful way opposing Hezbollah?
What I could say is the following about the Lebanese armed forces. They are on the verge of being the only remaining national institution that has the capability to sustain the security and to mitigate some of the effects